Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome to today's video. It's it's been a pretty interesting school year this year. I know that when it comes to my videos that I've been posting and what I've been putting out, it's really slowed down this year. And I should say this school year, because things have been so crazy. So anyways, today is actually the very first video of mine for 2021. And for those of you who have watched my videos before, you'll notice that I'm trying out a bit of a new format today. I don't always go live. That is something that I'm trying out new. I'm going to try and do a little more informal type of approach to things, where we do a little bit more of the live videos and post those rather than the more scripted, bit more formal, edited types of videos. And so today is a bit of an experiment, and I guess we will see how it goes. You know, one of the advantages of doing it this way is I get to live stream to both YouTube and Facebook audiences. And so that is something that is happening today. So we have people joining us on both YouTube as well as Facebook. And so I want to welcome all of you that are joining us today. Now, for those of you that might be new to this channel or this page, I want to start off by just sharing with you a little bit of who I am. All right. So for those of you that might not be familiar with me, my name is Danielle Rochford. And I am a grade 7 and 8 online teacher. I've been teaching online for over 10 years now. So it's a little bit of time that I've been teaching online. But you know, even with 10 years of online teaching experience, this school year is still it's a struggle for me too. So even with all of the experience that I have online, this year has been crazy. And so I can just imagine for those that have just started with online since the spring of last year, there's a bit of a learning process there. And so part of the reason for these videos is to help those of you that are maybe not as familiar with some of the technology and the strategies and things like that you can use during this time. I am also a Google certified trainer, and so anything Google related, I love to talk about. I use lots of Google tools in my classes, and so that is one of the things that did prompt me to go towards becoming a certified trainer. I also, outside of my online time with my students, my day job, I am also working on developing online courses and workshops for middle school students, parents, and other educators. And I do that through, I have a website, Rochford On Demand, as well as my YouTube channel. And ultimately, my goal is to help students become independent learners and assist educators in creating those positive learning spaces. Now, I want to share with you, before we go full-blown into my topic for today, I do want to share with you some of the things that you can expect in today's video. This is not going to be a full-blown webinar, hour-long type of thing. I am trying to keep it on the short side, okay? I will try not to get too long-winded. I was talking to my sister a little earlier before I went live, and I was telling her that, I'm trying to keep the video short, but sometimes I can get long-winded, so I will try and rein that in and make sure that I'm not talking too much. My goal is to share with you a few tidbits of information and have us out of here, within 20 to 30 minutes max. Okay, so that's my goal. I also don't have this structured as a tutorial video. Many of my previous videos have been done in the format of a tutorial video. But that's not what this video today is going to look like. Instead, we're going to be taking a look at sort of how we can use some of the skills that we've already learned through previous tutorials that we might have gone through. If you are an individual that is, sort of feeling, well, I don't really know much about Google Classroom. I'm still kind of a beginner. I need, some strategies, or I needed to know a few bits of information that I don't have. I do have playlists for majority of the processes that we're going to discuss today. I apologize for my cat. I tried to lock her out and our door is broken on my office today. So this is Stormy and she will be making an appearance today, apparently. But back to our expectations here. If you do feel like you need that tutorial part of things, getting to know things a little bit more, I will post a link to my Google Classroom playlist for teachers that I have that goes through a lot of the different processes that we will be taking a look at here today. The other thing that I am going to assume, I'm going to assume that in this video, you have some type of working knowledge of Google Classroom already. So not necessarily that you need to be an expert or anything like that, just that you have a general working knowledge, that you've worked with Google Classroom for a little bit, okay? So now that we have those expectations out of the way, here's the plan. I have a main driving question that we're gonna take a look at. I'm gonna suggest a few options for how to answer that question. Take a look at the benefits and challenges of those options. I'm going to share with you my own personal process and what I do, and then wrap up with some final thoughts. And I do have a few questions that were given to me through some of my social media platforms, and I'll share those questions as well as the answers at the end as we wrap up. Okay, so let's dive right in, and we're going to take a look at the driving question for today. I'm going to pardon me, I'm going to take a little drink there. Okay, our driving question for today. What is the best way to start a new term in Google Classroom? Now, this is something that I've actually had a number of teachers ask me personally through my website, other social media platforms that I'm on, and so this is a question that many people are asking. What is the best way to start a new term in Google Classroom? And when it comes down to it, and I've said this before in other videos for, other questions, what's the best way for this or what's the best way for that? There's not necessarily one specific best way. There are a couple of different approaches that you can take. And depending on your particular situation, who you are as a teacher, who your students are, one option might be better for you than others. So as I see it, when we take a look at, how can we possibly start new terms on Google Classroom, there are a couple of different options that I have seen done in the past, and a few that I have tried myself, okay? So the first option is that you could go through and you could delete your previous assignments. You could continue adding new topics to an existing Google Classroom that you have, or you could create a new Google Classroom. Now, each of these different options certainly has their own benefits and challenges. And as I think through the options, I really like to consider what some of the most common teacher complaints are when it comes to Google Classroom. So the ones that I've heard the most often, and ones that I've personally experienced as well, is, oh man, Google Classroom, it takes so long to load, okay? So that's one. Another complaint that I have heard is, it's really frustrating that I can't lock those old assignments because now I have students coming in, the term has already passed, and they're trying to hand in things that I don't need them to hand in anymore. And the third complaint that I have heard is that Google Classroom, the gradebook, is not flexible enough. How can I use that, but it doesn't have the flexibility that I need. Okay, so those are the most common teacher complaints. And so as we take a look at some of these different options, Some of them will answer those complaints better than others. If we take a look at that first one, so just going in and deleting old assignments, okay, that is certainly an option that's available to you. A pro, or a positive part of that is that you won't have students handing in late assignments because they won't be there on Google Classroom for them to be able to submit, okay? But there are a number of things that I've listed here as cons, okay? First and foremost, you lose data when you do that, okay? Whether it be marks that you've assigned or feedback that you've given to students, things like that, you lose that when you delete assignments. It can be time consuming. You have to go through individually, right, and delete them individually, so that can be very time consuming. And once you delete an assignment, you no longer have the ability to reuse it. So if you wanted to reuse it in another class or a future class, that option is no longer available when you do that. And so because there are so many cons to this particular approach, I actually do not recommend it at all. Okay, I don't think that you should go in and delete those assignments. It's not something that I encourage at all. Now, another option that is available is that you can continue using the Google Classroom that you have already set up. Now, it's a very easy approach to things. You don't have to set up another Google Classroom. Students, they only have to join one. And so this particular approach, I find, works very well in younger elementary classes, where you have younger students. You don't have to have them worrying about joining other classes and things like that. You get them joined at the beginning of the year, and then they just continue on. And then maybe you try and organize things using your topics and things like that. Okay, this is actually how I started off organizing things. I teach grades 7 and 8, and we have year-long subjects. Okay, and so when I first started off with Google Classroom, I did organize it this way. My whole year was in one Google Classroom. So, I was teaching science. And so my whole year for science was in that one Google Classroom. Okay. But some of the things that I was noticing was, as I was, constructing this and, putting together my Google Classroom year after year, I was finding that by the end of the year, the load times for Google Classroom, not only for me, but for the students as well, was really, really slow. And so that was a big challenge, right? So you'd get into Google Classroom, you click on the science class, and it would load and load and load and load, and finally it would all come up. Okay, so slow load times were a really big thing. Okay, it was slowing things down. The other really big challenge that I personally had was we'd get to the end of the year, so we're in June, and I would have students go back to missing assignments from September and try and hand them in. And those are, the grading period is done. And it's, not something that I can take from them now. And, and that was a little frustrating, having to deal with that. So even though you tell students, no, sorry, you can't hand that in, they still try and hand it in, right? Because it's there. So students submitting assignments, from earlier on in the year, that was a challenge. I was also, once the gradebook was introduced into Google Classroom as well, I was finding that in a year-long class, that became a challenge for me too. Trying to make it fit and work the way that I needed it to was a challenge. Now, there are, now that Google has continued to work on, the gradebook and has made some improvements on it, there are some workarounds or some hacks that you could use to potentially make the gradebook work for you if you use a year-long Google Classroom. But I found for me that it wasn't flexible enough. It still wasn't flexible enough to do what I needed to do. And so that brings us to the third option here. Okay, and that is creating a brand new Google Classroom for each grading period. So this is what I currently do. Okay, so currently, this is my second year using this format. Actually, I started it last year and I've continued it this year because it worked really, really well for my situation. So each grading period, I have a brand new Google Classroom that the students are given. Okay, it's great because it's a fresh start, right? A clean slate, right? So that's something that I really appreciated about it, and I think in a way many of my students appreciated that as well. You don't have a whole stack of missing assignments that you can't do anything about, right? It's a fresh start. It also, when you do a new Google Classroom for the grading period, you don't have any late work that ends up being submitted. And that's because what I'll do with the previous grading, the grading period for that Google Classroom, is I'll archive it. And so students are no longer able to submit assignments from that old Google Classroom. Okay, and so that helped to eliminate that problem of having students submitting this work that they really shouldn't be submitting at this point, right? So we don't get to June and students are trying to hand in things from September, right? So with this format, that doesn't happen. And I also found that in doing it this way, I'm able to structure my gradebook in a way that works for me, and it's flexible enough for what I need if I have separate grading periods as separate Google Classrooms. Now, the one downside is that in using this method, students do have to join another Google Classroom, okay? And so, my kids are junior high, so it's not as big of a struggle to get them into a new Google Classroom, whereas I think if you were lower elementary, you might have a little bit more of a struggle there, right? Where middle school, high school, it's probably not going to be as much of an issue, but it can still be. And I listed it as a con because that still can be an issue, okay? Now, that takes me to, so now I've talked about those three different strategies. I want to share with you exactly what my own process is, okay? So I begin the year with a Google Classroom for each grading term, okay? And there's a number of different ways that you can do that. You can, if you have like a template class and you want to, copy the template class, you can do that. You can start from scratch and reuse posts. Or you can use the same Google Classroom from the previous year. And that's actually what I do, okay? So last year I started this and I created so on the screen here, I'm sharing my example of socials, okay? So I had a socials Google Classroom for term 1, 2, 3, and 4, okay? And I set it up the way that I wanted it with all of the material there, organized it in the way that, that I liked to have it and that it worked for my students and found success in it. And I'm like, okay, well, this is working. I'm going to use this again. And so I used the same Google Classrooms from last year, this year. Okay, so I already had it all done, and it was just a matter of adding new students to that Google Classroom. But like I mentioned, that's not the only way to do it. You can copy a template class. Just keep in mind that if you do copy a template class, it works well, but not all the settings copy over when you copy the class. So for example, like the banner, gradebook settings, the Google Meet settings, they return to the default settings. And so that's something to consider with that, right? Or the other option is, starting from scratch, you set it up and then you reuse posts from another one. Okay, so I start off the year with a Google Classroom for each grading term. Okay, students get access to one Google Classroom at a time. So at the beginning of the year, I give them access to the term 1 Google Classroom. Okay, and inside that Google Classroom, they have access to all of the assignments for that term. And I know that there's I've talked with some teachers before where, they're concerned with something like that as well, but won't students get like completely overwhelmed with that? And I find that what I do is like I go through and I give what I call guideline due dates. Okay, so dates that you want to aim to have those things in. And when I teach them how to use Google Classroom, I teach them that you want to go to the classwork page, and this is kind of like your to-do list, where you start off at the top and you make your way down following those guideline due dates. And so if they're following those guideline due dates, they some students can say, there's a lot. But if you sit down and talk with them and work through it and say, no, it's just this you need to tackle first, and then this, and teach them how to plan their time and how they can schedule in those assignments, then it does help with that overwhelming feeling. Okay, and I know that after the first term, so now we're just finishing up second term at my school, and this second term, students have really gotten into the process. They're understanding what to do, and having a whole term of work in front of them, they know how to tackle it now. And so there's not the same sense of, anxiety or stress over having all of those assignments there. Okay. So there we go. Start off the year with those different grading terms. They get access to one Google Classroom at a time. At the end of a grading term, what I do is I make sure that all of those assignments are graded. They're all handed back, which is a very important part of the process. Okay, so they're all handed back. And then once I've made sure that all the grading is finished, everything's handed back, I then provide a link or the code for students to join the new term, okay, on Google Classroom. And so then once we have everybody over, then I will archive the previous term. Okay, so that what that does is it removes it from the Google Classroom dashboard, so for both teacher and student. Okay, and it goes to the archive tab. Okay, and no modifications are able to be made on that. Okay, so comments, submissions, things like that are no longer able to be made once a class is archived. Okay, and this works really well for controlling those assignments that shouldn't be handed in anymore, right? So when I am transferring students over to the new Google Classroom, there's a couple of ways that you can do it. You can post it to the previous term and then have everybody follow it, make it assignment or something like that before you archive the class. What I personally do is in our online session of our first online session of the new term, in class, I give students the link to join and have them join while I am there with them to make sure that everybody that needs to be in the class gets logged into the new Google Classroom. And anyone that has challenges, I'm there to help make sure that they get connected to the Google Classroom. So that's how I personally handle it. So I give the students the link in our first online session of the new term, so I can verify that everyone has joined. Okay. And so that is the process that I go through at the end of each term. Okay, so at the end of each term, make sure that students are moved over to the new Google Classroom, and then I archive the old one. Okay, now a few things to consider as well. I know that one thing that I did encounter this year was an ongoing assignment. So that was an assignment that started off in term one, and I wasn't going to be finishing it until we were into term two. Okay, and so so what would we do if we have like an ongoing assignment, right? Well, it's actually not too difficult. Okay, so it was a writing assignment that I was doing. And so I had the original post in term one of my language arts class. And so when I was going to my term two Google Classroom, I reused the post from term one. And I took off any of the attachments that I had from it, okay? And then once the students joined the new Google Classroom, I walked them through the process of attaching the working document that they already had going in their Google Drive. I walked them through the process of attaching that to the new post in the new Google Classroom. Okay, so even if you have ongoing assignments, there are ways that you can have the continuity between terms, even when you're archiving the previous term. Okay. Guardian summaries is another item that I know I've had a few questions on. Guardian summaries are actually really neat in the fact that they actually follow the student. And so if you get them connected, if you get those parents connected once with those Guardian summaries, even if students are in new classes and things like that, the guardians follow. So the guardians attached to that student follow them into the new class. So you don't even have to redo them. Okay. So I'm pretty sure that you can probably tell from the way that I'm speaking and the things that that I've been sharing here with what I do, that my preferred method is to start a new Google Classroom class for each grading term. And I know that in many contexts that can actually be extremely helpful. And it can help to save time, particularly if you're able to use them year after year, like what I did this year. I found that the beginning of my school year, as crazy as it was with everything going on in our world right now, one of the things that I did not have to worry about was constructing my whole Google Classroom. It was already, the bare bones, backbone of it was already there in place, and I just had to tweak it, right? And take a look at, slight adjustments that I might make for this particular year. Okay, and so it is a way that can help to save time, which I think all of us teachers need, right? Absolutely. All right, now I do want to share with you a few questions that I was given through social media this week when I asked if there were any questions about this particular topic. And so I have a few questions that I'm going to share. And I know that here on the live stream, I encourage if you guys have questions or comments, make sure that you're adding them to the live stream. Because I'm, hosting this myself, I can't monitor everything right now, but I promise that after the live stream has finished, I'm going to be going back to the questions and comments, and I will answer anybody that has made comments and things like that. Okay, but I do have some questions that were given, and so let me share with you our first one here. So the first question that I got was, why do you recommend teachers going through assignments and returning all of the work before archiving? So this is actually a great question, and I know that it is a question that I've had a number of times before, because maybe not everybody is familiar with why we should be doing this. Okay, so when you have assignments that students have submitted, say for example, they've written something for you, it's on a Google Doc, and they've submitted it to you. What happens through that submission process is that the ownership of the document is changed, okay? The owner is no longer the student. Once they submit it on Google Classroom, you as the teacher become the owner until you return it, okay? And when you return that assignment, ownership goes back to the student. Okay, and so that's one of the main reasons why it is a really large part of this process of, not only are you want to give feedback and things like that, but it transfers that ownership back to the student. Okay, so that you don't have these things in your own drive that you're an owner of, and it's like, wow, I don't remember doing that, right? Because it's actually a student document. The ownership was transferred to you in the process of submitting an assignment. So make sure that you return those assignments to return ownership back to the student. Okay. The other thing too is until you return an assignment, the grade that you have assigned isn't visible to the student. It's visible to you. You can see, so you can put a draft in there of what the score is, but until you hit that return button, the students are not able to see what score you've given them. Okay, so once again, another reason why it's important that you return those assignments. Okay, so those are some reasons why I do suggest that it's important to go through those assignments, make sure that you're returning them, particularly before you archive the class. Because once you've archived the class, like I said, you're not able to do anything. So students aren't able to do anything, but also teachers can't make modifications in it either. Okay, an archived class, nobody can make modifications. Okay. All right, let's see. I have another question here. Question is there a way to copy an entire topic over to a new Google Classroom? I really wish there was, because that would really make life a lot easier, wouldn't it? Unfortunately, no, that is not available at this time. I know that that is a request that I've put into Google. I would love to be able to see that, but unfortunately, no, at this time, it's one post at a time. So you can't take a whole topic and take all of those posts and transfer them or copy them over to a new class. It's one post at a time that you have to copy. Okay. All right, let's see here. Our next question is, I have a huge resources section in Google Classroom where I've posted anchor charts and various tips or hints. Is there a way for all my students to be able to see this without having to copy over all of the posts? Which is a great question. It kind of goes along with, our last question there, right? So unfortunately, we can't take a whole topic and copy it all at once, right? But if what you're aiming to do is creating a new Google Classroom and you don't want to, copy each and every one of those posts that you have under that resources topic, you can make sure that your students know where they can still find it. So once you archive the class, students do have access to, they have an archive link, and they can see classes that they're part of that have been archived, okay? And they can still see the material. They can see previous grades that they've gotten and feedback that they've been given. They can see those posts. They just can't do anything with them at that point, okay? So that would be a workaround for it. If you don't want to copy all of them over, you can train them to be able to go into their archives and where to find it. Okay, so that would be a workaround and something that that you could do. Okay, let's see our next one here. Why do teachers have to find hacks to make Google Classroom work? How can we get Google to improve things? I love that question, because it seems like, actually, and this year in particular, with so many people jumping onto Google Classroom and learning it and using it and things like that, this does seem to be a question that has popped up more and more and more. When Google Classroom was first created, it was actually not created to be an LMS or a learning management system. Okay, so it's not a full-blown learning management system, and that wasn't its intended purpose when it was first created. It was intended to be an assistant to a classroom teacher to facilitate communication with students and parents, and provide a place where assignments can be accessed regularly, especially for, say, for example, a student was sick or whatnot, that they would still have access to materials from class. That was kind of its original intention. And within the past year or so, with so many schools going online and using Google Classroom, we have been kind of seeing some of the limitations of what Google Classroom can do, right? The great thing is that Google is always open to feedback and suggestions, okay? And so if you are, in Google Classroom and you're frustrated with something that just, man, I wish it had that feature, there's actually a question mark in the bottom left corner of Google Classroom. And if you click on that, you can give feedback specifically to Google for Google Classroom and give suggestions on some of the things that you would like to see. Even within the past 6 months, we've seen Google start to roll things out that people have been requesting since the spring, right? And so they've been working hard to try and listen to the feedback and see how they can improve it for teachers and make it something that that is fully functioning, okay? So Google is really open to feedback and suggestions. Don't be afraid to use that little question mark in the bottom left corner of Google Classroom. All right, and one more question that we have here. Here we go, there we go. Do you just keep the class archived forever, or do you ever delete it? Okay, great question. So me personally, what I do is I don't ever delete it. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, I actually use those classrooms from year to year. Okay, so the Google Classrooms that I created last year are the same ones that I used this year. But what I've done is just before the beginning of this school year, I went through and I unarchived the different Google Classrooms, and I deleted last year's students so that they're no longer part of that class. Okay, and then I made the tweaks that I needed to make for the new school year. So in some classes, I added some new content that I wanted to do. I adjusted the due dates that I wanted the students to follow. And then I had most things already in place. Okay, so I reuse them. I don't delete them. I do know that there are other teachers and even other Google trainers that will, they'll just keep it archived forever. They don't worry about like deleting it or anything like that. They just create a new one and will reuse posts from the ones that has been archived. So there's a number of ways to do it. I don't delete it. I actually reuse it. Okay, and so yeah, so that's what I do. Okay. All right. Well, those are the questions for today. And I know that for those of you that do have questions maybe that I didn't cover today or that sort of pop up, feel free to put them into the comments. As I wrap up here and turn off the stream, I'm going to be hopping into the comments on both YouTube and Facebook and checking out what questions you have, if any, okay, and I'll answer them that way. I want to thank you so much for joining me. I know I went about 10 minutes longer than I intended to. Oh, I need to work on that long-windedness. But I hope that that I will see you again next time in the next video that I do. Thanks so much for joining, guys. We'll see you later.